welcome everybody, and thank you for tuning into this episode of Talkin' Fire. Our guest today is Joseph Cea. Joe comes to us from upstate New York. Him and I are in the same time zone, which makes things a little convenient for me. But the way he came to Talkin' Fire is kind of just organic. I happen to read Fire Engineering Magazine on the regular, and among some other things, and an article of super interest in their training notebook popped up, and Joe wrote it. So I did what you do in 2025. I just hit the keyboard and said, "Hi, I'd love to talk to you about this article, and I'd love to get you on a podcast." And Joe said yes. So here we are. Joe Cea. Hi, Joe.
Hi, how are you, Dean?
I'm fantastic. I'm glad things worked out for us. We connected like last week. I mean, just it's been maybe 10
Yep.
days that you and I have talked back and forth a
Yeah,
little
it's about
bit.
a week and a half ago.
Yeah, and I was talking to somebody earlier about how excited I was about this conversation for a bunch of different reasons. Obviously, I learned that there's more to you than just this article, right? We're more than just that. You're deeper than that. But the article was interesting, and then you're interesting. So before we go too far, though, you've been in the fire service 7 or 8 years? Why don't we talk a little bit about how you end up in the fire service and how this works?
Yeah, this is actually, I'm going into my 8th year. I had actually wanted to be a wildland firefighter back in the day when I was in my 20s. I was working for the Conservation Department in New York State. Did actually get certified as a wildland firefighter. Wasn't of nearly the criteria there is today. That was actually a combination of wildlife background and conservation background, and then wanting to be a firefighter from even my youth. I actually have a picture of myself. I just went through it. My uncle Mike had given me a bunch of old photos that he had put on, and there's one of me in a Hawaii fire truck. And, just sitting in there, and I was like, "Wow, this is like really good foreshadowing there." But for a while, I mean, it took me a really long time to really, I don't want to say come to terms, but to realize where I belong. I mean, I had a really good career as a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So that was, that it was fulfilling, but
Yep.
at some point, I wanted to change careers, had some life changes come on, and decided to take the plunge. And I had several friends in the local fire department, and it wasn't wildland firefighting. The interior is obviously completely different. But I went up to a friend and I said, "Look, what do I need to do?" And so he hooked me up with his department, and I signed on, got voted in, and started taking classes, and loved every minute of it. I'm a lifelong learner, so anything that I get new, when it's like a shiny new toy for me. I mean, I love being in the fire service. I love learning about what it takes to be a firefighter, what it takes to knock a fire down. Um, whatever situation you can come up with is just new stuff, and I love learning new stuff. And it's the fire service is just full of opportunities. So
Yeah, absolutely, right. Like, and that's what's interesting about the fire service is really anything you want to get involved with in the fire service. Give it enough time, and you can get involved in almost anything. And if you're willing to volunteer on something, you can find all kinds of projects, and you can really just make one up. Like if you say, "Hey, there's this need, and I'm willing to do it," most departments will let you run with something. So it really is like we got something for everybody, and um, we're going to talk a little bit about. So you have kind of a dual role, right? You're an on-call volunteer firefighter, but you have a station role, right? You have a kind of a little bit more responsibility.
yes, I'm a station keeper in another local fire department, separate from the volunteer fire department that I go run with. But that's obviously taking care of the station, but there's also a volunteer component to that position, where when we get called, we're the daytime crew
Mm-hmm.
essentially, and so whenever the calls are out during the day, there's 3 of us. There's me and 2 of my colleagues. The chief of that department is usually there, so we usually have at least 3 or 4 people going out to calls. I mean, sometimes there's smells and bells calls, but I mean, you can always count on a call around 10 o'clock when the local restaurants, fire up their grills or whatever. So
Yep.
So some of, a lot of them are smells and bells, but we do get some, some, fortunately, some, really, I don't want to say important because they're all important, but, some actual fires.
Sure. Right. And that's the thing is all, and, I, today at work, we got some storms coming tomorrow, weather, snow, like
Mhm.
that. Right. So we had to make some decisions about critical training. And what's funny is like when we say it, we all say the same thing. Like you said, important, right? They're all important. We're like, well, all the training's critical. Like we can't, but we have to reduce our day tomorrow or prepare to potentially reduce our day. And you have to pick what's most critical. And you're right. Like those runs you go out on, the activated fire alarms that turn out to be nothing or whatever, like those are those are important, but I know what you mean, right? They're not as important as somebody's stove's on fire and it's spreading the cabinets. Like that's a different level, right? So,
Yeah, it is.
um,
I mean, structure fire confirmed is a lot different than fire alarm at a local restaurant.
yeah,
Uh,
and it's
yeah.
and that's how it works, right? And I think that's and I don't know the history of your department, but I'm assuming that's how they start with station keepers. Is that during the day they get trouble getting people to turn out for those runs that aren't on
Yeah.
fire, and you still
Hmm.
because we still need to respond, right? So it just becomes a little more complex. Um, so uh, let's talk a little bit about the article, and then we're going to
Sure.
talk more about the fire service.
Hmm.
So the article is pretty straightforward because, or at least the title is right. It's teaching fire service youth. It's more than just instruction. Um, and so why? What led you to this article? Like what draws Joe like pen to paper on this?
This is years of teaching in the secondary level. Especially I started out as a seventh grade science teacher, biology and life science. And one of the reasons that I loved that level is because from day one in September to June, you could really see your impact as a teacher on those students. So I can see them grow. I can see the maturity level. That level, you really do see a lot of maturity throughout the year. And obviously, you're a factor in that. So
Mm-hmm.
you're contributing to that, and that was always very fulfilling for me. But you're it's more than just the lesson. It's more than just students coming up to you with maybe a boyfriend girlfriend problem, or something of that nature, where you're also a confidant, you're also an advisor, you're also someone that students learn to trust. You're an authority figure, but they know that they can come to you. If there's an issue. It's like, even if it's a homework issue. Mr. Cea, I didn't get my homework done. The printer wasn't working. So really, it's up to me to then prescribe something that, I mean, I could have a hard edge on it, or I could say, all right, you know what, let's print it out right here for you.
Yep.
So I mean, there's a lot to being a teacher. It's not just the lesson. So when you're talking about the needs of students, I mean, I tended to be a little more, have a little bit more hard edge on some of the needs. I mean, if you don't, every student's going to ask you to go to the bathroom every day.
Right. Right.
So you do have to, kind of clamp down on stuff like that. But those are needs. Those
Mm-hmm.
are needs of the students. They have to know um, that their needs are going to be satisfied, because if they're sitting there wanting to go to the bathroom, or they're, even if they're hungry, something like that, I mean, if you happen to have science class right before lunch, you're probably going to get students that are probably getting their stomachs are rumbling a little bit, and they're probably not going to pay as much attention to you. So I have to shift tactics a little bit
Mm-hmm.
for that period versus first period. So there is a lot more to it than, you're providing needs, you're providing psychological needs. You're the confidant, you're the advisor. It's more than just
So you
the
get in the
lesson.
fire service, and you're obviously involved in training at your department, and you
Mhm.
recognize that the youth need more, or I shouldn't say that, or that you can provide more, because I don't want to say that they weren't getting enough. Maybe they were getting plenty, and you said, "Hey, we can either do more of this, or we can share the good things we're doing." So that's interesting, because I got to tell you, there's some things in the article that I had never really considered before when it comes to
Mhm.
youth, particularly. And you got a piece on a sense of belonging, and I've always said that people come to the fire department, and some people just come to belong, and that's maybe more so, I kind of grew up in a call department, and then as I grew up there, the department really shifted to a career department, and that's what it was when I moved to the role I'm in now. But it some people just show up and bang on the door and say, I want to be on the fire department because they want to do something, right? They want to be a part of something. And maybe they don't, I don't want to say they don't fit everywhere because you could fit into plenty of other things, but a lot of social clubs are a little more social and clubby and not
Mhm.
the same sense for all, right? So some stuff's just different for us. And I guess I never really thought about that when it comes to the youth, that their sense of belonging may be a little different, or they're looking for something a little different. Um, and
Well,
it's
I
our
could, I could tell you one thing that was, it was such a little thing, um, but it had a huge impact. One of the things that I went to the mat for was getting the explorers in that department, the white shirts with the company patch on it. And the fact that they had a company patch, I mean, the explorers in that department had their own patch,
hmm
and I didn't feel like that was appropriate. I mean, I wanted them to have a sense of belonging to the department itself. And
okay,
so I lobbied to have the company patch and to give the explorers their own shirts for like parades and stuff like that as part of the
yep,
dress boots. And I had actually had a patch made up that just said the word explorer on it. And I put that underneath the company patch on the sleeve. As a matter of fact, my mother still. Uh, so I did want them to have their own identity as explorers, but I also wanted them to know that they belong to this department. So that little patch made a huge difference. It's like a mindset, it's a mentality. It's like, yes, I belong here, and these people, these other firefighters. I go to drill, and I'm right next to a firefighter. Someone that does this stuff for a living or whatever.
hmm
So I think the explorers really, really um, get into that. They want to belong, and that even something small like that, it makes a big difference.
yeah. It's because it's not always the big stuff, and unfortunately, like a lot of times, we think it is big stuff, but it isn't. It's just those little things that we can do that, like you said, make a connection, form, allow someone that feeling of belonging. It doesn't need to be this big action. An Explorer, a patch that matches a department patch with a rocker that says Explorer under it. It divides them enough, but it connects them enough.
Yes.
And right, and we all, and I think we see that in a lot of departments, big and small. Right, the department name, and then maybe either a group, depending on how the departments are organized. But whether it's a group or whether it's an engine company or a ladder company, right? Or a platoon, depending on the makeup, and they have their own identity, a subset of the bigger, organization, and
Mm.
all of that it's important. I mean, that esprit de corps that comes along with that, right? That honor among the few there as it is part of the bigger. And I think that's, if you look at some of the bigger fraternal organizations in the fire service, that's how they kind of play too. Like you're members of a smaller thing, but you're also members of a bigger thing. Um,
Mhm.
so, um, in writing the article, what else did anything surprise you as you drew, like from your experiences? And I guess I shouldn't even say it to that, but how about this? As an educator and then being in the fire service, is there anything that surprises you? Like, wow, the fire service could do this better, or we could have done this differently, or
What I think I would like to see in the fire service is for people involved in explorers and in training youth to take an adolescent psychology course.
hmm,
A lot of times, what you get is the advisors in the explorer post. They're a lot of times they're the parents of the students or the
yep,
junior firefighters that are in that unit. And sometimes that can work. I mean, there was only so many things I was going to be able to coach my son when it came to baseball. I mean, he
right,
wasn't going to listen to me beyond a certain age.
hmm,
So I mean, just because you're a parent doesn't necessarily mean you can train and teach. Beyond your own children. And I really think that the fire service would really benefit from firefighters taking an adolescent psychology course and knowing just some of the developmental things that come up for adolescents.
Yeah, that's really interesting and probably super valuable. And I think about, and spending time as a firefighter and a fire officer and as an instructor, and I think about all the stuff that I did to get my degree, and I'm sure I took a psych class at some point, but I took one, and I guarantee you it was a generalized psych class, just enough to make me go, "Wow, I'm messed up," right? Like that's about it. Um, and I often joke that it would be beneficial if we took more of those classes. I mean, where I am now in my role, we're fortunate enough in the agency I work for that, we have a curriculum design specialist who's I mean, a doctorate, comes to us from education, um,
Mhm.
has really helped guide some of the things we do with our adult learners, because I mean that's who our academy is really targeting. We do some
Yes.
youth programs, but I mean the majority of our programs are designed for either recruit or experienced firefighters. And but even some of the things that that person's really helped us figure out, um, our some of our methods were archaic, and were they working? Maybe they were working, but we did a lot of stand and deliver. We just did a lot of like, we're going to stand up in front of these people and we're just going to talk.
Mhm.
And,
Mhm.
that's not as effective as it once was. We do.
It's funny you say that because you get you can reach the maximum amount of people within the maximum amount of information doing that, but are the students really learning in that scenario, in that environment? I mean, straight up lecture, yeah, you'll get a lot of information to a lot of people, but what are they doing with the information? Are they really paying attention in class? I mean, are you really taking care of their needs? Are you really connecting with them to make sure that the that learning has occurred?
Right, right. And there's a time and a place. Like, I mean, if I'm going to see a speaker, right, or we've got a big presenter in, and I'm going to sit there for a few hours, and they're gonna woo me with 3 hours worth of information. A lot of times they do a great job, and you get some nuggets, right? You walk away with 8 or 10 things, I don't know, 5 things, whatever, and you decide whether that was of value or not. But when we're talking about either a recruit program or a fire officer program that's multi-day, we can't just be standing in front of them. And I think you mentioned it, that it doesn't. If we're looking for them to learn and absorb, it's different. If I'm sitting in front of and name the speaker. I'm at a major conference and I'm sitting there in my chair and I got my little notebook out. I'm listening, sure, and I'm checking my socials and I'm listening and whatever. And when they say something super interesting, I'm going to write it down and I'm going to implement it, or I'm going to look into implementing it, whatever it might be. But when we're talking about training firefighters, we don't want them to just get a nugget. I mean, if we're doing a 30 or 45 minute or an hour lecture on forcible entry, that's not a whole lot of time. We need them to get all of that information, not just the 5 bullet points. We need them to get everything. And it's up to us, I think, and to make it interesting, to make it relevant to what they do. It's up to us to make sure they pay attention. It's not up to them. You know, um, I don't know. I always feel like if we're struggling to make a connection with the learner, it's not usually the learner's fault. Usually, if we're struggling to connect, we've got to come up with a new way to connect. Um,
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the class actually it flows from the instructor, it flows from the teacher.
mhm.
The students are what's that from the Karate Kids? Like no such thing as bad student, only bad teacher.
Right.
So that really is true, especially when you're talking about a hands-on thing. So I mean, if the instructor doesn't know what's going on, but that's one thing, but the instructor really has to garner the attention of the trainees. And if they're not going to make it relevant, as you mentioned, they're not going to, make a connection for them. For example, some departments one department I worked for, they did a lot of drafting. Their district was really a lot of farms and whatever. So if I'm talking about, flaking out hose, and it's a district that does a lot of drafting, probably, I'm not going to make a connection with that student, with that trainee. I have to make that connection. Yeah, I'm going to flake this hose out, but first I have to set up my hoses to draft from that farm pond.
Hmm.
So, and
Hmm.
then all of a sudden, oh, wait a minute, farm pond, that's what I do.
Right.
Okay, so now I've made a connection between flaking out hose and what they do in their department. And so that's gonna be monumental. That's gonna take me that extra mile where that student is gonna really start paying attention to me.
Yeah, and I think that there's somebody said for that connection, right? Because that connection's rapport. And there was a time where, at least I think, that the instructor could stand up and just start talking, and the rapport was there because they were the instructor and they're in front of the room. They must be the subject matter expert. They must be amazing. That's why they're in the front of the room. But now, I mean, now that we've all got this, computer with us in our pocket all the time, they can't pull fast ones anymore. We don't get that luxury. I mean, and I'm not saying they did, but 25 years ago as an instructor, you could stand in front of a room and say almost anything you want, and they couldn't contest
There's no
it.
way to verify.
Right. I mean, until they got back to their department where there was an IFSTA textbook or a Jones and Bartlett textbook or whatever, or they went to, went back home and there was a World Book Encyclopedia or Britannica or whatever. There was no way they could contest what you said. And then once you were out of there, and now if if you don't know something as an instructor and somebody asks you a question in a class and you don't know, you're better off to take a break or to say, someone got their phone out, Google that. Just Google that. And let's have a conversation about what you discover and maybe validate what they're discovering. Oh yeah, I've heard of that before now that you mentioned that, or look at the article written by so and so, like that kind of thing. Um, but you can't lie to them anymore. They 25, 30 years ago, they could get away with lying to me. I wouldn't have known.
No, that's like the worst thing you could do is be untruthful with students.
Oh, and
Um,
because now they know it right away.
can't
They
do that.
immediately.
Yeah. No,
Uh,
and they're gonna call you out on it, and
sure.
rightly so.
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't know what your craft is, I mean, you're probably not shouldn't be up the front of them.
Yeah, and I mean, we all can't know everything about everything. So at the end of the day, even if you're a subject matter expert in something, somebody raises their hand and say, "Oh, I heard, a couple weeks ago there was an article about this. Do you know anything about that?" No, I don't know. I assure you, somebody else is typing into their keyboard, right? As you're having that dialogue with another student, a third student is typing into
But
their.
that's when I don't want to say turn it around, but let's say in that scenario you're talking about, oh, did you hear about this article? Well, no, I haven't, but maybe you can enlighten us. I mean, if you had that article handy, I'd be happy to discuss it.
Yeah,
So I
because
mean, like
because
I
if
said, you don't
you're
want to turn them around, but
well, no, it's fair. I
um,
mean, like because they might just be able to do that, right? They turn it around and they say, "Well, in the article it said this and this and that," and then all of a sudden, as the SME, as the instructor, you go, "Oh yeah, I've heard of that. Oh, it's a new way of looking at it. Oh yeah, okay, now I get it. Now, or completely never send me that link. That's interesting. I might
yes,
I might add that to this program, or I might
yeah.
add some of those thoughts to this, and that gets street cred too.
Yeah, and then what you do is you say, send me that link, give me a chance to review it and do some research, and then we can discuss it in the next class.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, because I think that's what they're expecting now. And I don't think they do it. I don't think the majority of students do that stuff to jam an instructor up because I really don't. I think the vast majority of people are good. I think that they're doing it because they're interested. I mean, we're piquing their interest in a topic, and while we're talking, they're googling something or searching something, and that's awesome because that means that they've become interested.
Yes, and they're
Interest.
and they're engaged when they do that.
Yeah, right. I mean, and I assure you that 15 or 20 years ago, we would have thought that was a distractor. Oh, they're being distracted. Well, the reality is they're not being distracted because they're still on topic, but they're engaging with the information, which is really what we're looking for. I mean, we want them to engage with the lesson and with the instructor, but we really want them to engage the information. And I mean, there's been times I've been in classes where I'll be Googling stuff just so it's in my search, just so I can go back later. Oh yeah, boom, they said something. I'm going to search that, okay, and search that, and then they're there later. My search history shows me that I searched these 6 topics, and they were the 6 things they were talking about.
It's funny. There was just an example of that. There's one instructor I had here. It was for principles of instruction, but also instructor 1 and 2. Fantastic instructor. Unfortunately, passed away now. But in the principles of instruction class, he recommended reading a book called Seven Fires, and it was about 7 fires that the catastrophic fires that shaped the fire service in the United States. And it was just a fantastic book. And I did the same what you're saying. I Googled it on my phone just so I had it and I can go back to it later on. I did actually order that book. I read the book. It was fantastic. I recommended it to anyone that'll listen to me.
So, and that's how we do things now. I mean, so do you notice that with the youth? And I know that obviously your department and the way you're teaching the youth, it's a small. I'm going to assume that it's a smaller group. When I say smaller, it's not this. But do you do you notice that they engage with the device a lot while you're teaching, or do they not? Like if you're hands on, they're just not. They're away from the device. They're hands on. It's different.
I don't see as much of the devices the way we're doing things because what the students want in our Explorer post is the hands-on stuff. That's why they're there. They want to put fires out, but we can't do that with youth. But
Right. Right.
they want to do hands-on. They want to do the forcible entry stuff. They want to do they want to handle the tools. So they are paying attention when we're going over that stuff. So there's not as much lecture.
Gotcha.
Um, I mean, just to set it up, yes, but you're going to lose them if you do that, and it kind of feeds into what pet peeve of mine. If you're an instructor and if you're saying, oh, this is going to be an interactive lesson, and then you're just talking at them without the students or the trainees having the opportunity to even ask you a question, you're going to lose that group. I mean,
Hmm.
there was during COVID, it was tough. I mean, it was, there really wasn't a lot that I could do. I did some Zoom lessons,
Yep.
but I almost lost that entire group. It was really once the restrictions really started to loosen up a little bit, and I was able to do more hands-on stuff again. That's
Yep.
when everybody was engaged. So I don't see as much of the device as much um, in ours because we kind of gear more toward the hands-on.
Right. Right. So where I am, we don't allow our recruits devices at all. Which there's some debate, but we don't allow it at all. And in our Con Ed stuff, I'll call it our Con Ed stuff, our fire officer programs and all the myriad of programs we run for like people that are on the job. We don't monitor that. I mean, if they're whatever, their computers out, their computers out. If they're taking notes, they're taking notes. If they're watching videos, I guess that's what they're doing. We don't because we consider them adults and they're here on their own accord. And if they're going to get stuff out of what we're doing, they're going to get stuff out of what we're doing. But we have started in some of our more advanced classes, some of the fire officer stuff we're doing is to interact with the device too. Like, okay, hey,
Hmm.
working in a small group, visit this website, do this, or search these topics and report out, so that we're encouraging the device. We're encouraging using here your group research this topic for 15 minutes and then we're going to have your report back out on it. And now you got 4 or 5 groups looking at 4 or 5 different topics. They're doing their own research. They're finding their own resources, um, and then like kind of like you said earlier about flipping the classroom. Then they're teaching everybody in the room something, and the instructor
Hmm.
included, because now the instructor just sits back and goes, "Okay, tell us about that thing. What you had all this time." And if you give a group 5 minutes, they don't want to look like fools in front of their peers, so they're gonna do some research. And in that
Yes.
in that time, they're gonna learn something. And if anything, they learn about where to find things. It's amazing how we're all accustomed to searching, maybe. Um, but when you put somebody on a task and say, hey, you need to come up with 4 ways to do this or, these types of things, once they Google and they get that first or second page, they don't know how to go much deeper sometimes. And now they have to. One of the evolutions or one of the things we do is they have to, I don't know, make a sales pitch to their town about why they should go to some conference. They have to pick a conference. And we tell them, we list off like the big 2 or 3 conferences and we say, you can't go to those. You got to find something that involves overnight travel and it can't be any of these big ones. Because the thing is, those big ones are easy to search. You just type in conference. And I mean, if you type in conference, there's going to be 3 that come up, right away. And we say, can't use
Yes.
those.
Yeah.
Because what we want to do is we want to force them to search for something obscure because the obscure thing shows that now they can do research. The obscure conferences usually cost a little less money. and you might get smaller group sizes, which is a plus. Um, so it's one of the things we do to try to inspire them to find something. And then when they report out on I think like 4 or 5 of these little conferences. Now the whole room now knows about the 3 big ones because we talked about them and then that group talked about another 4. So everybody leaves there hearing about 7 conferences. So even that person that showed up never thinking about a conference at all now left with 7 conference ideas, and that's from one 15, 20 minute exercise. So um, it's about just different ways to engage people to keep their attention. And I don't. It's not just the youth, but um, interesting. So let's get back to you, and let's get back to the fire service. I mean, we've been there, but we'll kind of get back to. So right now, you're on with a volunteer company. So you're just south of like Selkirk, right? Did I get that right? Is that
Actually, I'm north of Selkirk. Actually,
okay?
what's interesting is, and I think I had mentioned it to you the first time we talked. Last night was kind of February 4th was kind of a demarcation point for me, for lack of a better term. The one volunteer department that I had been in
Yep.
for 8 years, I just went to social member with them, and I got accepted as an active firefighter in another one that's closer to my girlfriend's house.
Perfect.
Uh, because I'm going to be spending a lot more time there now. I'm transitioning to moving into her town, and so I wanted to, to go active with where I'm going to be the vast majority of the time, so I can make sure I can get to calls. So it was difficult to get the calls going back and forth, even
Sure.
though we're only about a half an hour away. So now I'm an active in another department, but obviously I did that because I love being a firefighter,
Yeah.
and I want to go to calls, and I think this department is very small, and it's probably about 25% of what my previous one was. So I'm going to have to take on a lot of roles there, I think,
Mm-hmm.
because because of the there's not as many members, which I
Sure.
think is going to be good for me because, I'll be able to. I don't want to sound like I know everything because I definitely do not. But I have been in a couple different departments, and there's a lot of ideas that I could bring in, and a lot of different techniques. Maybe we can
Sure.
incorporate in a few other things. But at the same time, I think I'm kind of excited about this new opportunity. So.
Y- Yeah, and I think that stuff becomes exciting. I think that what's interesting. What you just said was that your department now, the department you're going to be involved in, is about 25% the size, roughly, whatever,
Mhm.
of the size of the department you were in, and that means there's more. You have to take on more roles, right? Everybody has to take on more roles. I've always joked that it doesn't matter how big your fire department is, right? I mean, it could be 4 people, 40, 400, it could be 4,000. You need someone that's in charge of training. You need someone in charge of apparatus maintenance. You need someone in charge of the station. You need someone in charge of incident report review. And we could go on, right? We could probably come up with 100. If you and I just started talking and listing, probably come up with 100 different things people need to be in charge of, oversee. And it doesn't matter if your department's got 40 or 400 people or more. Somebody's got to do those things. And it's funny that, a lot of times people will discount small departments and say, "Oh, what do they know?" Well, everybody on that department has to be, a driver. Everybody on that department's got to run on an engine. Everybody's got to
Mhm.
understand the ladder if they have one, right? Everybody's got to understand the heavy rescue if they have. Everybody has to understand every seat. Now, can you be great at everything? You can't. There's too much. But you've got to be good at all of those things. Whereas, frankly, on a bigger department, you can become somebody who's on an engine or somebody who's on a ladder or somebody who's on and you can become really good at one thing. That doesn't mean, and again, you're good at other things, but you can become super good at one thing. And smaller departments, you don't have that luxury. So in taking on more roles, you end up learning more things, right? And I think that's where you are, right? You'll be able to share what you've got from your other experiences, but then you'll maybe take on some new things and things you haven't done before, which will be cool too.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be some district positions, like even vice president, I think was open. There's going to be a role for treasurer, I think, coming up. Yeah, I mean, I'm not a numbers guy, but a lot of that stuff in my previous department was taken care of, and I didn't really have. I mean, I just yay, I passed the budget. All right, but now again, I'll have to get involved in coming up with a budget.
Hmm.
And so that's a much different role. So I am looking forward to taking on some more responsibilities.
And that's, and that's another thing. Like, so where I am in Central Mass, most of the departments are either combination call career or small career departments, um, for a bunch of reasons. And all the departments around here have grown, um, like a lot over the last 25 years. And when I started 25 years ago, 26 years ago, I guess, the department that I was on had four career people and everybody else was call, and we turned out. And now they've got about six or seven career people a shift. And they might have one or two call people left in their kind of specialties. A couple people were on like a regional dive team and stuff when they kept some of them. I say they kept, I mean, it's not that they got rid of anybody through attrition. They couldn't attract anybody because that's kind of in this area that's gone. So I love listening to people talk about places where the volunteer culture is still like strong, because I know it's strong in the vast majority of areas of this country, and I love it because I think that hearing people talk about like the department getting involved in the budget development and the department getting involved in decisions, and there being a vice president, a treasurer. And I got a really good friend who's over the line in Connecticut, and he's involved in his department, and his son's involved in the department now, and like hearing them talk about how their department operates, and it's not a social club. It's not a voluntary social club. It's a fire department. I mean, there's no BS fire department. Um, but there's I don't want to say there's more of a family because I don't want to insult anybody else. Um, it's fun. It's just interesting. I guess that's what it comes down to, right? This is interesting to me, to
Yeah, I
hear
mean,
about
the
how.
dynamics are always going to be a little bit interesting. I mean, like I said, 22 members, I think, I think I would make 23. Uh, there's a pretty good geographically, this district is spread out a little bit. My previous district, um, you go down the street, you make a loop, any given loop in town, you're going to come up with probably about 20 hydrants.
Oh wow!
And, I mean, there's just a lot. I'm exaggerating. I
But
mean,
yeah, yeah, I know. Right.
but here I don't think that there's going to be nearly as many hydrants, and so you got to your strategies might change quite a bit
Hmm.
depending on what the situation is. So I mean, it goes back to what I was telling you about drafting. I mean, the one district that I worked for, they had 13 hydrants in the entire district, and most of them were for drafting. There was a couple of them in a local uh, adult community, but that was about it. So I mean, it's a lot different. The strategies are different. You have to think differently. So I'm looking forward to that challenge.
Yeah, and I'm sure that'll play into how you grow as a firefighter, but then how you grow as an instructor, right? And how you grow um, as a as someone who's mentoring the new folks coming in. Like it all just changes. It's really interesting. So, um, not that we're wrapping up, but there's a couple things that I like to make sure I cover.
Hmm.
Um, and so we kind of talked about how you got in the fire department. And every firefighter you could be on for 48 hours or 48 years, and every firefighter's got a memorable call. And I say you could be on 48 hours because you could be on a department 48 hours, and that first call you went on is memorable. I mean, I think I remember the first call I ever went on, and it wasn't. It was like a wires down. But I was in the back seat of the engine, and I remember it like it was yesterday. So if I had been on 48 hours and someone said, "Hey, what's the most memorable call?" I'd tell you, "Well, we were turning onto the street, and whatever." Like I can remember that thing. Um, so memorable call.
Um, as a station keeper, yeah. There was in that district, there was a call we had um, fully involved. Structure fire confirmed. We get there, and we were first arriving company, and so we started, pulling holes on there, and
Mm-hmm.
two of my colleagues were going to go in. I was going to stay at the door for them. And one of the things that was really memorable about that, we had visible flames coming out of the porch and out of the first floor, but most of the fire was in the basement. So they were going to go into the basement first and put that out. But as we were pulling the hose up and we are getting dressed and putting SCBA's on, S on it, apparently this house had oxygen tanks. that the residents had never turned in. They had an elderly relative that was living there, but they never got rid of the oxygen tanks. And so as we were getting ready, we had oxygen tanks exploding all over the place. So, we hear the explosions in the background. And we're like, oh
Yeah.
God, what the heck is going
What
on
the
here?
heck? Right, right.
So, and that was, that was kind of an interesting call from that perspective. I mean, we had to actually take out one of the basement windows. We had to make a basement window a basement door.
Oh, there you
So
go.
we had to take a chainsaw to it just to get the angle because there was plenty of water down, but that we were flooding it, but there was a couple of spots that we just could not reach, and we had to get a different angle, so we had to start cutting things up, and but it was a December day, so we also had the challenge of the cold. So
Sure. Which is, something we in the Northeast have for a challenge. And I know,
yes,
I'm sure, I've got some friends in the South that would argue that the really, really hot summers, give them challenges as well. And I get it. But there's just something about those cold, cold days and nights in the Northeast when the wind's blowing and, you're spraying water on things and it's freezing, you're making snow. And it's like, this isn't right. This isn't. But, I always like to say that, I'd say today's a perfect day for a fire. It's 62 degrees. There's a light breeze. There's not a cloud in the sky. Today'd be a perfect day. Never happens on those days.
no,
Somebody around here, I'm sure, will have a fire tonight. It's going to be 15 degrees out, or they'll wait until tomorrow when it's going to be about the same, but with snow. And that's kind of what happens, at least around me, is that it's not on the 62-degree day with a light breeze. It's on a really really windy 70-degree day, or it's 12 degrees out.
yeah. When
Um,
I walked in the station the other day, maybe about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I mean, it was a pretty cold. It was single digits when I got there at 8 o'clock, and I walked in the apparatus bay. I'm like, I really hope we're not the flow
yeah,
water today.
right, right. And that's just it. And it creates another series of things that we've got to worry about. Now we've got slip, trip, and fall hazards on the fire ground beyond what we normally have, or now we've got maybe ladders that freeze up against the building. We got to contend with that. Maybe we're trying to do something on a ladder and the ladder's frozen, and we've got to be, it adds a layer of it just adds a layer of complexity. And it's nothing, and I guess it's not anything we can't handle, but
No, it's a challenge, but yeah,
it might slow us down a few seconds, or it might, we might have to just change a little bit of a tactic or something, or it definitely changes things. I think especially when you're making up right after the call's over, everything's done, it's time to go. I always found in the super cold, that everything just seemed to slow right down. And no
yeah,
matter and everybody wanted to speed up and get out of there, but there's nothing you could do. It just felt like everything you did was just heavy and cold, and of course there's always somebody who's like, oh, why don't we take our coats off and warm up in the truck, and because I'm not going to want to put this back on. I'm not once I'm done, I'm going to be done. That's why. Um, but how do you, Joe? How do you maintain you? How do you keep up like your training? Obviously you wrote an article, so like you're obviously someone who's thinking. But how do what is it that you do?
um, well, you got to take as many classes as you can, and it doesn't necessarily have to be with the state fire agency either. I mean, there's a lot of in the county that I'm in. There's some county classes. There's some local. Obviously, go to drill as much as possible. I mean, there's other, even NFPA. NFPA has their website. I've taken classes online. I've taken FEMA classes online for I renewed my wildland certification.
Mm-hmm.
So I still have to take the PAC test, but I mean, there are a lot of resources. So I mean, even if you don't get into a class, um, there might even be different classes in different counties. So I mean, it doesn't have to be the county that you reside in. So I mean, right now, like I said, I'm in another department now, but it's a different county, and I've already seen
Right.
on the board different classes than I'm used to in my previous county. So now it's like, wait a minute, I didn't even know this class was available.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, okay, so now I'm seeing different titles. And I'm like, that looks really cool. I mean, I just saw one that was fire alarms. and that has never been offered in my previous county. So now I'm going to look into that one, and because that's something that comes up with every day. I mean, we're always going to fire alarms. So I would love to take that class. So I mean, you definitely got to keep up with the trends. You got to keep up with uh, uh, any kind of available training. Not that you're going to make everything. You can't do that. But even like, I mean, the fire engineering article came from previous training as a teacher. But whenever I research these articles, I just did another article for a short one for another publication, and it was on radio communication.
Hmm.
So when I write these articles, I do a lot of research, so it helps me to keep myself up to date, with the trends, because I don't want to write something that's not accurate. So I make sure
Right.
that I thoroughly research things when I write. So so I mean that keeps me young, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, and it's true. Like I think that sometimes we discount. So in Massachusetts, we've got a sweet gig because the Mass State Fire Academy offers um, all of its training for zero cost to Massachusetts firefighters. There's some, and it's part of how we're funded. We're not funded necessarily through the tax dollar, although some of it is, but it's got to do with fire insurance premiums and stuff, and just a great system they set up years and years and years ago to offset the costs associated with training firefighters. So, but now that also means, and they get really high quality training for free. Like it's amazing the level of quality that we really push for when you consider that it's free. But that doesn't mean that you have to just, I know so many people that say, well, I've taken everything the academy has to offer. Okay, have you been to Connecticut? It's not that far. I mean, have you been to New Hampshire? New Hampshire has a fire academy. A couple of the
Mhm.
counties, we used to have county government in Massachusetts. We still kind of, a couple of the counties still run stuff. The district fire, the district chiefs organizations run some stuff.
Okay.
Some of the bigger departments run some stuff that is open to the public, and is maybe $25 or $30. I mean, in Rhode Island Fire Academy is running more and more stuff that's open to anybody, any firefighter. And I took a class in Rhode Island a couple weeks ago, probably 2 months ago now, a month and a half ago, and I think it cost me $35 or something like that, or 50. I don't even know what it was. It was short money for what I
Yeah.
got.
Well
Um,
worth it. Yeah.
yeah, and that's the thing is that at some point in time, right? It's an investment in yourself. But so people don't always look, and you're right. FEMA's got a bunch of stuff. The National Fire Academy's got online stuff. There's a bunch of
Yep.
things that are out there that are free for the taking. And even more if you're not looking for a cert, right? Like if you're not looking for a certificate that said you did it, fire engineering is a great resource. The trade websites, like for watching videos or reading an article, you can get a lot out of reading an. I don't have to tell you. I mean, we're here talking because you wrote an article. That's what puts us here. But like,
The irony of
um,
that.
yeah, that the irony is that I was just on a soapbox about that, and I just kind of walked into that. But that's that's it. That's all it takes is somebody writes an article and somebody goes, "Hey, can we implement this thing, whatever it is? Like, can we try this with our people? Can we do this skill?" And that turns into a training. So I don't know. It's interesting. Training's always it's always an interesting topic, as there's a lot of things that are. But so we covered a lot tonight so far. Um, let's see. Oh, what I want to talk about before we
Sure.
before we wrap up, because I think it's worth it. Um, I had a guest on a couple of episodes ago. Well, depending on when this actually hits, I mean, it could be a couple episodes ago. It could have been the last episode. I'm not really sure. But he at the end he forgot to talk about some stuff, and I forgot to talk about some stuff. So I made some really good notes. You write a monthly column for First Responder, the publication. It's not really a magazine. It's more like a newspaper.
Yes.
I mean, I get it's like a magazine because it comes out once a month, but it's like a newspaper type magazine.
Yep.
And I think it's all over the country. I know it's all over the Northeast and the East Coast.
It is regional. I don't know how
Regional,
far they
right?
extend them.
Um, so you write a monthly article for that, and I think that's also worth just mentioning because
Mhm.
that's cool too. And what do you write on? What do you write on monthly for them?
It's mostly from an instructor standpoint,
Okay.
but it's various topics of different kinds of training. I started out with I think the first article was Lunar.
Hmm.
One of the things that I don't want to say uh, it wasn't bug me, but it did kind of stick in my craw a little bit. It's like, the acronym, the way I had been taught was to, make sure you have all five elements, the acronym as you're calling in your mayday.
Hmm.
And there was one instructor that I had where he was saying, you're probably only going to get, three pieces of that five, three pieces of that five out. So just concentrate on those three. And I was thinking, I don't think that's really the right way to do it. I mean, because if you teach five, people will remember three. If you teach three, people will remember, so I mean, you teach the whole thing for a reason.
Hmm.
And so that was the focus of the article was not only teaching the importance of teaching the entire lesson, not for changing any of it, but also uh, from the perspective of um, a black hat. You may be a black hat, uh, taking that call, taking the mayday, not so much giving them. Everybody trains on calling a mayday, but nobody
Right.
trains on receiving the mayday. Like, what do you do?
Right. Right.
And and part of the article was about you have your script in front of you, and that's Lumen.
Hmm.
You got to talk to that firefighter, make sure that you're in constant contact, with that firefighter because they're going to be freaking out and
Yeah.
they're gonna be panicked and you have to talk them off the ledge literally and literally and figuratively and like, well, how do you do that? Well, you have your scripts right in front of you. It's like, all right, what did you come in on? What resources do you need? I mean, do I really care what apparatus they came on necessarily? Not really, but I mean, if it keeps me talking to that firefighter to keep him alive,
Hmm.
yeah,
Hmm.
that's important. So it's not so much yeah, I mean, it can be important for car, but the article was really just go beyond that, go beyond the calling of the mayday. Well, another one I just wrote was on leadership, which was a
Okay.
tough article to write. But what is leadership?
Hmm.
And that's not so much you know a, uh hands-on topic. It's
Right.
more abstract, but certainly that was it's from an instructor standpoint. How do I instill leadership in someone? How do I do that? How do if I'm in a classroom teaching them, rope skills or knots and whatever, how do I teach them, leadership in that instance? And that was kind of a tough article to write, like it's sick because it's abstract, but
Hmm.
um, it was those are the ideas that come to me for those articles.
Sure. That's and how long you been writing for them?
Year and a half.
Cool. Typically, when I talk to people and they say they're involved in that magazine, newspaper publication, probably the best way to say it, um, they're usually photographers. They're usually usually that's what you hear. I don't bump into people that write for that. I know they have articles. I mean, I read it, so I mean, I know I get it. But usually, the folks that you talk to are writing either blurbs about incidents or planned events that happened or award ceremonies, and they're photographers. Like usually, that's who you bump into. So it's
Mhm.
kind of interesting to again, it's interesting to talk to someone who says, "No, I actually write a column in one of those publications." It's funny you bring up Lunar because you and I are maybe 160 miles apart. I don't exactly know. I'm trying to think of like what it takes me to get. I mean, I can be in like Albany, I think in 2.5 hours. I think that's about
Oh,
right.
wow, I didn't know you were that far.
So I mean, maybe so. Turning Stone Casino is like 4 hours. Don't ask me why I know that. I do enjoy myself a casino, but anyway, it's about 4 hours. So, and we teach lips like we do locations in problem safety or problem solution or problem save ourselves but we do locations in location identification problem. So it's just funny that even that the fire service varies from kind of place to place, and I know even in Mass, like some departments teach different things. But I think we don't do a great job teaching how to hear it. We do a great job teaching how to transmit it. We do some
Yes.
training on like, okay, a chief's going to get the message. What's the chief going to do? Well, that's great if the chief's on scene, and we even talk, and we're pretty good. We even talk a lot about what's the dispatcher going to do if or a person in a comm center or whatever, if they hear it, what are they going to do? But we don't do it. I don't think, as a fire service, I don't think we do a great job of that mid-level people. What is a mid-level person going to do if they get that call? And that's
Hmm.
sometimes where we drop off. But it's interesting because it's something we got to really train on. We need to train on. Okay, two companies are on scene, and we talk about like two companies are on scene and things go bad and there's a mayday, and we talk about the response to that. Like, okay, we're going to make sure one of those people, one of those companies is going to become RIT, whether it's the two pump operators or whatever, and they're going to start to we're going to focus on saving ourselves. We're going to talk about rapid intervention, sure, but what about just taking that lunar or that lip transmission, just taking that? Who's going to like? And we know it's the incident commander, but do we do a really good job training those people? And like you said, the incident commander could be a black helmet. It doesn't have to be somebody in red or in white, depending on what part
Right.
of the country you're from. Also, been a big shift around here to go back to black for officers, which is white devices, which is cool too.
Interesting.
But yeah, there's been a big shift away from I say the red helmets. I say big shift. I don't know if it's a big, but it's definitely a shift. And just I don't know, which I don't. That's the stuff that I guess I don't have an opinion. It doesn't.
It's above my pay grade.
Yeah, I mean, when I left the fire department, I was wearing a red helmet. Okay. If the captain's there now, wear black helmets. Okay. The department I work for per diem, I wear a black helmet because I'm a firefighter. Okay. If I went in tomorrow and they said we're replacing black ones with pink ones, that's okay. I mean, like there's some things I have capacity for and some I don't, and that's just one of them that I'll do what I'm told, and that's okay. So, um, anything else you want to cover? Because we're kind of here. So, anything else you want to cover?
Well, I think part of the motivation for the article, part of or how it came together in fire engineering was that the idea I think was initially because there's obviously there's Maslow's hierarchy
Mm-hmm.
that was part of it,
Yeah.
but there was Erickson's 8 stages of development. That's like again, it goes back to taking an adolescent psychology class, and those 8 stages are typically over the course of someone's entire lifetime. And so what I did was I said to myself, all right, well, if I take those 8 stages and I condense it to just training, so those 8 stages are actually like, over the course of someone's life, 60, 70 years, that's theoretically supposed to be.
Sure.
And, and I just condensed it to, year and a half, maybe 2 years for an explorer's training, and then just, started coming up with the, comparable examples. So it's kind of interesting how the whole thing felt. But probably the most important one, I mean, we touched on the sense of belonging, but
Mm-hmm.
probably the most important part is the identity formation. So in an adolescent, when someone develops their identity, who they are, who they want to be, if you instill um, being a firefighter as part of someone's identity, as they're developing that identity, uh, it's a permanent part of them. And so from a recruitment and retainment standpoint, even as there's ebbs and flows to someone's life. And you may start out being a volunteer firefighter to the point where you're at every club you possibly can. You're
Yep.
maybe teenage, late teens or 20s, you're going, and then all of a sudden you get into a serious relationship and then you get married and have children. And and there's now all of a sudden you're driving kids to ball games or whatever. And so your participation in the fire service may take a back seat because there's other more important priorities for you,
Mm-hmm.
and that's understandable. But if the fire service is part of your identity, at some point you will come back. And we talked about roles. Then there's a role for everybody. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I was 46 when I joined, and like my biggest regret is not doing it 20 years earlier or whatever. But the point is that uh, I'm 53 now. I don't have that much time left as an interior firefighter, but for everybody. So I'm going to go to fire police, or something like that.
Yep.
That's,
Sure.
so there's, but the point is that if it's part of my identity, it's part of who I am. And that you're always going to retain that person who has firefighting in their blood, in their identity. And doesn't necessarily have to be a family connection. Like I think I'm the first one in my family to be a firefighter. My son has followed in my footsteps. He's a firefighter as well, but we're the first, so I'm hoping that it continues, with,
Yep.
as the generations, come by. But, um, so if it's part of your identity, you always come back in some capacity.
Interesting. Interesting. Okay.
And I think that was really the one thing I really wanted to kind of hammer home on her.
Yeah, and I made some notes. You saw me looking down, so I made some notes because that kind of hammered home in some thoughts that I have, um, just about that because I think there's there's a lot of merit to that, and that and that ties in right to that place for everybody. They leave, but they come back. That how can we really drive some um, like long? I don't want to call it long term retention because it's not just that long term connection. If it's part of their identity and there's a sense of belonging and there's a sense of commitment, um, it'll always be there. People once it's in them, they'll come back. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think back to it's something funny that I always seem to go back to, at least maybe in the last like year and a half. There's a there's a Mr. Rogers episode where he basically tells the kids to look for the helpers, and we're okay. So I always think about that. At our core, firefighters are just at their helpers. It's like the easiest word that everybody can relate to. What firefighters truly are deep down inside. It's why we struggle to watch recruits fail, and I see a lot of instructors that work with us at the academy. They don't want to let recruits fail, even though sometimes we know that's what they need to do. They need to
Mm-hmm.
fail something so that way they can learn from that. But we don't like that, right? Because we're helpers. We don't want people to fail. We're the people that struggle when we see somebody changing a tire on the side of the road. Like we have to do that double take. Like, can I pull over? Can I get over there? Should I get over there? What, like, and because again, at our core, right, that's who we are. And I think that if we can instill that core belief of being a helper, being someone connected to the fire service young, like you just said, that we can rely on that person to stay for a while, but then we can rely on them to come back when we need them to come back.
Yep.
They'll like find their way home because at their core and their being, we've made them a firefighter, and I think that's cool. So unless you've got anything else, Joe, I've got nothing else.
No, I think I'm okay.
Yeah, we,
I love the tone in the conversation. I think it flowed really well for us.
perfect. So um, our guest today has been Joe Cea. My name's Dean Babineau. Our executive producer and engineer is Mac Rice. Join us next time when we'll be talking fire.